Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the NESN Bruins podcast. I'm NESN.com's Mike Cole, joined this week by, NESN.com's Logan Moll. Logan, what's up?
Not much. How about you?
It's the same old. We're down a man.
Yeah. 4-1 out for Nick.
Our top line is now just two skaters. Nick Goss is gone, dearly departed Nick Goss. Not dead, but dead to us. I think it's a good way of putting it. We will not be seeing or hearing from him ever again on this podcast.
Who?
Exactly. And, probably not for the worst. I don't want to kick a guy his way out, but no, I'm just kidding. Nick is gone. Will not be part of the NESN Bruins podcast anymore, so we will soldier on, maybe add some, maybe we'll have to add some grit and sandpaper of our own. We'll have to start looking around the league.
The Milan Lucic to our podcast.
That's true. Maybe we can get him. Anyway, it's been a while since we've convened and talked Bruins, and there are reasons for that. Mostly our just inability to coordinate and schedule and get together and discuss the Bruins. But I'm going to blame it mostly on the Red Sox. We've been busy around here.
Yeah.
The Red Sox went to the World Series and stuff.
Yeah, a couple things going on here and there.
A lot going on. So I guess we'll just start basically kind of getting ourselves caught up and kind of, hashing things out and kind of getting caught up on where the Bruins are. What are they?
8-4-2.
What is that?
Third place in the Atlantic, 18 points.
So that's 14 games? So what's 82 divided by 4? What are we? We're like a fifth of the way through this? Yeah, about a fifth. Yeah, sixth.
Yeah.
It's still in its infancy. This
is why we're doing this. We're not mathematicians.
Yeah, season's a young pup. As you mentioned, the Bruins 8-4-2, 18 points. They're in the Atlantic Division right now. I guess in terms of expectations and things like that, how has this team met those expectations, failed to meet your expectations? That was a big thing that we talked about in our premiere episode a couple weeks ago. So how has that kind of played out for you?
Well, I think a lot of the questions that we had going into the year were about, the answer so far is about what we expected them to be, right? They have almost no secondary scoring outside of their top three forwards. Krejci's the only guy in double digits for points.
Yep.
I don't think we necessarily could see, and who could, all the injuries that have come along.
True.
I don't think that we assumed that Steven Kampfer would be getting meaningful ice time on a third pairing and whatever it is, November 8th.
Yep.
So some of it, they feel like they're very average, but the reality is that maybe the expectations going into the year were a little too high. This is about what they're going to be. I mean, third place in the Atlantic, considering that they have the Lightning and the Maple Leafs to contend with, that's about right. You know, they're competing to right now keep the Canadiens out of their way. You have to think that they're going to end up falling off. Same thing with the Sabres. I mean, right now, once you get past the Bruins, you have Canadiens, Sabres, Senators, Wings, Panthers. And the Panthers entering the year seemed like they'd be the only team that would give the Bruins a run for third place, and you expect all these other teams to flame out. So who knows? I mean, maybe we're just a little bit too critical.
Well, I don't know. I will say, I think, if I recall correctly, I was right. I was, I think, a lower on this team than you and what's-his-face were. This has kind of played out the way I expected to, at least in terms of the results. Yeah. I think the way it's actually happened is a little bit surprising. I think the fact that, we talked about the production from the first line. We'll get into that a little bit more later on. The fact that it's been so lopsided, they really haven't gotten anything out of anybody outside of that top line. To have that kind of fall the way it has and to still be in striking distance of first place in the division, I think they've overachieved relative to the production they've gotten. But I guess you can't really take that away either. It's a weird...
Right. Well, it's funny because a lot of the things that we assumed would happen is like, DeBrusk will just stay exactly where he is, right? And right now he's slashing 3-1-4. Yeah. And, everyone kind of thought, okay, well, Donato, he'll be, the goal scorer that he's supposed to be. My comparison is Frank Vetrano that can actually score. Well, now it just kind of looks like Frank Vetrano, and he's in Providence because of it.
Yep.
So a lot of the sort of gambles that they were taking going into the year of, all right, we're going to, continue hoping that these young guys just kind of keep building on where they were. Well, there's a chance that they end up just leveling out. We're seeing it with DeBrusk. We're seeing it with Danton Heinen. Anders Bjork, we kind of didn't get as much of a glimpse into him because his season ended early last year. But I mean, he's been fine enough, but he hasn't been necessarily the top 6 forward that you necessarily need.
It's also kind of interesting to look at in terms of like this team. I'm doing it in my head. It's not a whole lot different than the team that they had last year that was one of the best teams in the entire league. And granted,
their key departures were bottom 6 forwards.
Right. I mean, like Tim Schaller, Riley Nash was awesome last year relative.
That's proved to be a big void.
Right, and that's, I think, kind of hurt them more than I think most people would have expected, or at least I don't know if it's hurt them, it's just taken them a longer time than maybe expected or wanted to find a suitable replacement for him on the third line. So that's kind of an issue. But other than that, this team's not a whole lot different. The division, the rest of the league, the conference at least, is better probably than it was last year. So they're kind of feeling their way there, but it is a lot of the same pieces. Just the fact that I mean, we'll get into a little bit more later too. Just the first line, just the production they've gotten from them is just wild. Like the fact that they keep doing it when you expect it. Like the game the other night, they scored. They win a game 2-1, and they get both goals from that line. One of them's in overtime with like 30 seconds left. And this is just kind of the way they have to win games right now.
It is, and conversely, I mean, the concern with that, on top of just being too top heavy, is what if one of those guys gets hurt?
Yep.
What if you have to start throwing a wrench into that line? And they may do it anyways in the sense of moving somebody around.
Right.
Maybe Pasternak goes to the second line. He seems like the likely candidate, but the chemistry right now, because of the way that you're winning games, you can't really mess with that.
Well, that's the thing. You have to stick with that, and just until it's just everything goes to hell.
Right. Well, because the Bruins are supposed to be a contender, so they're not really in a position where Bruce Cassidy can, like he was able to last year, where everyone thought, okay, if they get into the playoffs, they get into the playoffs. They're not really in that spot anymore where they can say, you know what, we'll just tinker around and throw the kitchen sink at things and see what sticks. They're in a spot where they have to win, and the reality is that they have to keep that top unit together, even at the expense of the remaining 9 forwards. To
that point, just talking about that line, I was just looking it up. David Pasternak's got a 20.7 shooting percentage this year. That's far and away better than his career average. You got to think like at some point maybe that starts to regress to the mean. Like that's the other thing too, is you're a 2-week slump away from really falling on hard times. So if that stuff starts to equal out a little bit, then you're in trouble. And it's just looking at one other thing I wanted to point out. I thought this was interesting in terms of just like the general offensive struggles. They're averaging 30 shots per game this season so far. That's 24th in the entire NHL. The last 5 years, they've ranked 8th, 2nd, 4th, 8th, and 5th in shots per game. So like not only are they not scoring, they're not generating the opportunities that they have in years past either.
They just look slow.
Yeah.
Like every unit except for the first one. I mean, the Krejci line, Krejci, DeBrusk, and whoever the hell else is with them is a little bit different. But I mean, you watch the third line and it just looks like they're getting no attempts on goal. Like the shooting lanes are all clogged up, and they look afraid to shoot sometimes. And so it's sort of like the thing in the past for them has been, throw pucks on net, and Backes is standing at the crease. Like that's where he kind of, made his money. And it was the same thing with take your pick of guys. There's always somebody right in front of the net, and you just throw it there and see what happens. Now it's just they're a little too guarded. It's waiting too much for the perfect shot, and the perfect shot isn't coming. And so when you have that sort of change in methodology, when you put the top unit out there, then you can obviously see the difference.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's fixable, if that's something that maybe they're not built, maybe they're built in perfectly, or if it's just something that will kind of come around. It's just kind of interesting to watch. Because like you look at a guy like Jake DeBrusk, and I wonder, how well he fits into that, especially skating on a line with David Krejci, who is used to, that he's much more used to like that Bruins style of hockey for the last few years. Doesn't necessarily fit, and it's just. And so, like, that brings me into, like, the next issue is, like, you start trying to tinker with these guys and find the right combinations. You're not allowing guys – it's like this weird chicken and egg thing where you're not – it's harder to find the right combination without moving guys around. But if you're moving guys around too much, you're not allowing guys to get familiarity with each other. And I think that's kind of an issue they've had so far. They just haven't been able to find that right combination yet.
Right, and especially because there's so many new pieces.
Right.
And, it feels like guys aren't – last year it felt like everybody had a role, right? It felt like everybody knew what they were doing. You take a look at the third line, and it was Heinen was there to shoot.
Yep.
Backes was there to get in front of the net. Nash was there to facilitate, right? You look at the group now, Heinen's supposed to be the shooter. We looked this up earlier. He has what, like 11, 12, 13 shots
14
this year.
shots in 12 games, something like that.
Yeah, and when Backes is centering that line and then it's whoever else is playing on the other wing, that's just not going to work. I mean, it's an anemic line.
And not to mention, these guys are still learning on the fly and just figuring out how to succeed at that level.
Right, and it's so much easier to continue on the Heinen example to sort of learn on the fly when Riley Nash is having a career year.
Yep.
But when Backes is trying to figure things out himself and hasn't played center in a few years, it's, you're relying on them a lot more in a spot that they may not necessarily be ready for.
Not to mention also injuries playing their part in terms of whether even it's on the back end. I mean, they generate a lot of offense from the back end. Not having Charlie McAvoy affects that. They didn't have Grzelcyk for a while, so they didn't have Krug. Like, all of these things I think are contributing. So I guess if we're going to assess the first month of the season, I'm not completely surprised. I also think it's relatively incomplete in terms of trying to give them a grade or something. I don't know, because it's just things still have to kind of be settled.
The results are kind of what maybe on the low end of what you'd expect. Like if you watch the games, it can seem a little disappointing. Like they just seem sluggish. Like they're not playing as exciting of a brand of hockey. Right. But then you look back and it's they're not in a bad spot in the standings. Like they're still, if they string together a couple wins and create some separation, they're going to be able to cruise for a few months. So it's kind of confusing. Like you said, like it feels incomplete.
Yeah, and you talk about stringing together wins, getting hot, getting on a roll. One person who has done a very good job of that so far this year, and is really, I would say, I was going to call him the MVP of this first six of the season.
MVP.
Is a good way of putting it. Would be Jaroslav Halak, who's been absolutely sensational. Leads the league in save percentage, leads the league in goals against average. He's 4-1-2, if I'm not mistaken. He's been very good so far this season. And honestly, as we sit here on, what did you say today was the 8th? The 8th of November. He is the Boston Bruins' #1 goalie. Tuukka Rask has admitted as much. They're going to ride that hot hand, and I think we probably both fall on the same spot with this one in terms of just letting him go and kind of riding the hot hand.
Right, you have to, and I'll say my criticism of Don Sweeney this offseason is that they didn't do enough to pursue scoring depth outside of Tavares, and when that fell flat, it was just we're going to try and load up on bottom six
or
forwards.
Or even Kovalchuk, they fell flat on that
Right,
too,
and Kovalchuk too. But the smart move that he had is knowing what Tuukka Rask's MO is, and as good of a goalie as he can be, you are guaranteed that for some sort of stretch, he's going to go ice cold. And not to say that Rask has been as bad as he's been in previous years, last year being a pretty good example, but the foresight to get an adept backup and not just say, we're going to roll with Zane McIntyre, or we're going to cross our fingers that, we can get some other low-end guy who's always been a backup. That was an intelligent move, and that's paying off right now and helping them get some wins. Now, eventually, Halak will come back down to earth, but he's also been in a tough position in his career where he hasn't played in front of a lot of great defenses. And not to say that this one's stellar given all the injuries that they're contending with, but the top unit would, he's never really played with as good of a defenseman as Chara is, even in his advanced stage, and just the knowledge and the IQ that he brings. So I think that
he's never he's never played with a line that dominates puck possession as much as that first line does for 20 minutes a night.
Right, and it's funny because you watch him. There was one game he turned away like 40-something shots, and it's just he's used to getting peppered. And so I think when that happens, he's a little bit in his element. But it's he'll make the saves that he needs to make. A lot of the issues with Rask, we saw it on Monday, the goal he gave up against the Stars. He's giving up soft goals. But Halak, that hasn't been a worry. And so at this point, especially while you're trying to feel everything else out in terms of personnel up front, to have a reliable guy who's going to at least give you a chance to win. If nothing else, he'll give you an opportunity to win. That's been key so far.
Through his first, I just looked it up real quick. Like through his first 7 starts, if I have the math correct, carry the one. Hudobin last year had like a 932 save percentage through his first 7 starts, and I think we all look back on that Hudobin run and being like, he was awesome for them.
He was
like,
insane.
Halak's been better. Halak's at 952 with a 145 goals against. So that's been a blessing. He's been better than Hudobin for not a whole lot more money. So, like you said, full marks to Sweeney for making that happen. And, I think you look at Rask. Rask hasn't been terrible.
He really hasn't.
The opening night in Washington was an abomination.
Right.
That
if you take that out, the numbers are not nearly as bad.
Yeah, I did. And take out that opening night game, he's got a 927 save percentage, which is 18 points higher than his season save percentage. So really kind of tells you he's been really good at the late, 953 over his last 3 games. Bruins 2-1 in those games. The issue, as you mentioned, and I jumped in on, is just some really bad goals that he's got to eradicate. It's kind of been the knock on him for a while now. Yeah. Really, I mean, when we first came up, it was the glove side thing. The last couple of years, it feels like it's been, in addition to the big game stuff, which is kind of a, you can argue that one all day and really not find a good answer. He does have that tendency to give up some bad goals. So it's always going to look worse than maybe it is, and I think that's what kind of people will harp on. But he's been okay.
Numbers aside, I mean, the biggest knock is, when's Tuukka going to give up a soft goal?
Yeah.
Because you don't want it to be in overtime.
Yeah.
He's been fortunate that if you take out the Capitals game, that most of the soft goals he's given up, it's been first period, second period, something like that. And then you take a step back and you look at Monday's game against the Stars, and that dreadful goal came 3 minutes, 4 minutes into the game. Then after that, he was fine. Yeah. And credit to him for having the resolve to be able to sort of put that behind him. But just pulled up now, I mean, this isn't exactly a shock. His career splits, his worst save percentage and his highest goals against average come in October. In 51 games. He's 24 and 23 in the month of October.
Which is ironic, considering he's a guy who gets pounded for not playing well in the playoffs either. So
right, and it's
he bookends it.
Season. Well, and he brought up something interesting it was either at the end of training camp or shortly to the start of the season, that he now is citing these slow starts as him getting older, and that it takes a little bit longer for him to get acclimated to the game. I don't know how long you can ride that excuse, but it's
Christmas?
Right. Well, and you're also kind of cornering yourself a bit when, having Halak's great and everything, but at a certain point, shouldn't you have been able to just rely on him enough to say, all right, we're going to give Zane McIntyre or whoever an opportunity to play once every few games, but we can turn to you and rely on you. But,
and, Tuukka's going to get hot at some point, and I think when they do that, they can ride Tuukka as the hot hand. And, that's the thing, too, is that at certain points over the last few years, when they get really hot as a team and they keep going back to him, that's kind of where you see the wear and tear start to add up. So the fact that they're getting this much out of Halak early on, I think bodes well for them in the long term, at least in keeping Tuukka fresh, which is it's weird. You just talk about him feeling old and not being able to start fast, and now we're also talking about him managing his workload. It's kind of weird, but he's 31.
And it always, like you kind of started to get as, it always seems to turn around. I mean, we saw it last year where after he got benched after that dreadful Edmonton game, and then he comes back and has that huge game against the Lightning at the end of November, and starting there, he didn't have another regulation loss until like mid-February. And looking back at it again, October's his worst month, but the only month in his career that he has a sub-2 goals against average is December, and that's also when he has his best career in terms of his months save percentage at 931 and 10 shutouts. So it almost feels imminent, but at the same time, it's when you're in the moment, it's tough to kind of step back and analyze and be like, well, history says he's going to turn around. History says he's going to do this, but also says he's going to turn around. It's kind of your hands are tied.
Yep. It'll be interesting to see what happens with that moving forward, too, because, like I said, he's on the wrong side of 30. I don't think that matters as much for an NHL goalie as it does for, like, an NFL running back. But, there's a reason they went out and felt they needed to upgrade that position in the offseason. I think the Bruins know it as well. I'm not saying Tuukka Rask is done. I'm just saying it's something we have to monitor moving forward because he's certainly, I would say, he's made the turn.
Well, and he doesn't really have the excuse of being older than 32 because isn't Halak like 34 at 35?
That's the thing. Like, goalies age weirdly too. It's not
Tim Thomas the year they won the cup, right? I mean, it's fortunate that they have the luxury that they do in Halak. I mean, even with the way Rasks is playing, they still probably have one of the best goaltending tandems in the NHL when you consider what other teams are dealing
Oh,
with.
definitely,
but at the same time, when you're treated the way Tuukka is treated, there shouldn't be concern of when are you going to give up a soft goal? When are we going to have to bench you for a few games? But that's the reality of it. They planned accordingly in the offseason. It's happening now. And when Halak cools down, then Rask goes back in.
Definitely. All right, let's talk about a lot of the things we touched on earlier. It really, it's just, I mean, if you just Google like Bruins storylines, so I don't know why you would do that. You wouldn't get anything. But if that was the way
Check
the
the
internet,
Google Analytics on that.
Yeah, if that was the way the internet worked, the secondary scoring, I think, is like the two words that really continue to follow this team. Or maybe lack of secondary scoring, if you want to make it a forward phrase, has been a real big issue for this team so far. We've talked about the brilliance of the Bergeron line. They have combined, entering Thursday night, they've combined scored 24 of the Bruins' 39 goals this season. That's insane. Put it another way, Zdeno Chara has 3 goals this season. That's tied for the 4th most on the roster, right behind those 3. The team shooting percentage, 9.3%. That's 16th in the league. The league average is 9.8%, so it's not like they're inherently unlucky. Kind of speaks to the shots on goal stat from earlier as well. I think I saw this on, I want to give the right credit. I think it was WEI.com had, it's been 12 days since somebody other than those 3 have scored a goal for the Bruins. We talked about the Monday night game. It's just, they're not getting anything from anyone.
It's an appalling drop-off.
Yeah.
I mean, just looking at it right now, so once you get past Krejci, who has the 4th highest points on the team, your next forward is 8th, and it's Jake DeBrusk, who has 4. At 4 points, 14 games into the year.
For a team that's been pretty good.
Right, for your 4th best forward. Yeah. They need help, and I don't think the answer is internally. I don't know where it is. I mean, they're crossing their fingers. Okay, DeBrusk figures it out. Heinen starts shooting. But what are your other options? I mean, you look at it and it's, okay, you know what you're getting with the first line. Krejci's better when he has a score with them, but Krejci has 2 goals, 8 assists, and it's just your hands are tied. You have no internal options outside of your defensemen. In terms of forwards, you have 3 guys who are actually showing up right now, and then maybe 3 or 4 others who could find enough scores, secondary scores, but just aren't doing it. So they need help, and it's probably not in Providence, and it's probably not on the ice right now.
Yeah, and I think they have to figure out, too, how much patience that they're going to have, and I think that's that's always going to be one of the main questions when you have a team that is this young, or at least you're counting on young players to step up. And it's also weird, too, it's like how much patience do you have with a guy like David Backes, where it's, I don't know what you do with him, because, again, I don't know what your better options are.
And you can't trade that contract.
Right, yeah. So there's a lot of – they're just in a weird spot. Like, if you just look at this roster as a whole, it's just a weird spot to be in because, yes, they have that young talent that, if it plays up to its utmost ability, then you're golden. But if they don't, then you still have a ton of contracts that aren't necessarily bad, but they're not, imminently movable. So you're in a weird spot. Yeah, I don't know what else to add to what you added or what you said other than just I don't know, like how long can you wait for these guys to kind of figure it out? I'm not sure.
Yeah, and the example that I always kind of like to use is the 2013 Red Sox. So totally different sport, but
confirmed.
All those guys had incredible years in 2013. And then Ben Cherington sat back and said, we're just going to roll the same group out. But all those guys had career years. You can never expect them to replicate that. Look at pretty much any top 6 forward, and there's going to be a few bumps through the first few years. When you have as much success as so many of those guys did in their first year, and you expect them to just replicate that again, it's a tall task. Not to say they can't come through in specific moments, but they're in such a tough place in this limbo because you can't punt on guys like that you've invested so much time in, and you have seen can do what you need them to do.
Yeah, it's in there somewhere.
But you also can't wait until January, and you're in this tough spot where you don't want to move a ton of guys, but you're still just not scoring goals. it's a really tough place, and this is where teams end up, and this is dramatic and way down the road, but you look at like the Ottawa Senators and it's, okay, we're fine, I guess, but we're not going to go anywhere. Like, we can sit in this 7th, 8th, 9th place in the conference type limbo, or we can just do a full-fledged teardown.
Yep.
So, as I mentioned before, and we can get into this in a little bit, but the option right now is not really in the organization, I don't think. And even if, you know, one of 3 young guys, one of 3 young forwards steps up, you still probably need more help. That's why they went out and got Rick Nash last year.
Yeah, the only internal option is and the idea of patience. Like, that's the only thing that they can do internally. Even Neely said it. Again, this is not to rip off, we're not taking everything from EEI, but EEI's Matt Kalman talked to Neely and said, we recognize we don't want to sit around way too long for something that may or may not happen. So they're getting to the point where they have to make a decision. I think they're getting closer to that. And, I don't think a game like Monday nights helps. I don't think that's a point for the patience column. That's for sure. I don't know exactly what they do, and that's the other thing too. And we talked about this earlier today off air. Is like, you look around the league, and it's when you're trying to find help this early in the season through the trade market, especially, you're kind of in a weird spot where teams are still either trying to figure out what they're going to be, or they don't want to give up on assets too early. At the same time, do you want to go try to pick over the carcass of like the Senators, where you're not going to get something great in return? Also, the stock on your young players who would be trade chips isn't very high right now, so it's just in a really weird spot where you kind of spinning your wheels a little bit.
Well, because there are teams, the teams that have good talent to take, also are expecting to turn around.
They're in the same boat as you.
Right. You don't expect, and honestly, a worse boat, because you don't expect the Blues to continue to be one of the worst or second worst team in the Western Conference. Like, they have the talent to turn things around. It's the same thing where it's still early, but you're basically hedging your bets on, all right, maybe this team will still be garbage at the trade deadline, and then we can start poaching players from them for pennies on the dollar because they need to start from scratch. But at the same time, if that's what you're angling for, what happens if all those teams turn around and then the Senators know that you're desperate and you want Mark Stone or take your pick? That's my guys. They're them going out and getting Mark Stone.
Savior.
It's a very unenviable spot to be in.
I agree. There's not a whole lot else. Mark Stone, I'm just looking that up real quick. He's had a pretty nice season.
He was one of the guys that they were trying to flip during the offseason at the same time as Carlson and other guys escaping me. They sent down to Florida, to the Lightning. We'll move past this.
I'd like to. I was just looking up the cap hit. That's what the problem when I start doing things two things at once. He's got like a $7.5 million cap hit.
Right, and the
insane.
Bruins also don't have a ton of cap flexibility.
So that's the other thing too. Is like, it's not like you can trade. In these young guys that would be their trade chips are guys who aren't making a ton of money. So
right. So the Bruins, according to Cap Friendly, currently have a little over $6 million in cap space.
$6 million, you said?
$6 million.
That's more than I would have thought.
Right. You can do something, but it's still, you're still not in a place to get a huge playmaker if you intend to re-sign them long term.
Right. Yep.
And the big name that comes to mind is Blue Jackets legendary winger Temi Panarin.
Right.
And who everybody's obsessed with.
That's like the one name that it keeps coming back to. Like, if you were like to ask me what should they do, it's like, well, I don't know.
I guess trade for him, right? But and we've gotten into this before that it's okay. You go out and get him, but you have to give up DeBrusk and McAvoy.
Right.
Didn't you just take a step back and
doing that? Right.
Panarin's, I think, 27. So it's kind of that whole cost benefit thing. And then are you going to mortgage your future and then all of a sudden you can't sign this guy because he wants more than $6 million a year? And then now you have to go into a full-fledged rebuild. So there's kind of this tightrope that they're walking if they want to acquire some of these guys.
And that's for that. I think the trades that you make right now are, I don't think you're making that blockbuster deal. I think you just, I guess you're just trying to take some third line lottery tickets or something and just continue to try to figure that out, because again, like, I don't think they're at a point where it's blow it up or anything like that. They don't have to do anything too crazy, because they've been lucky enough where they've been able to tread water and do more than tread water, whatever's above tread water, like doggy paddle, I guess. Like, I don't know, like what you would call it, but they've been able to do that. But I do think a move is coming eventually, and I think this kind of also talks to what you said earlier, where like they kind of just look, like the look of it isn't necessarily right, so maybe just shaking things up for the sake of shaking things up kind of goes a long way too.
Well, I'd be interested to get the perspective of a national guy, like somebody who looks at them better compared to through the lens of here's what the rest of the league is doing, because sometimes the eye test can be a good thing, but again, the results are there. The Bruins aren't in nearly as bad of a position as many other teams are. So is it just the product looks a little slow, so in turn, it's okay, they're just average, when the reality is that they're fine enough. Another name that I threw out this morning that, looking now, probably makes a little bit of sense is Tyler Bozak, former Leafs legend, who's now with the Blues. Say that the Blues end up, this is what the Blues are. Maybe they're a little bit better, but they'll only be out of playoff contention by, a little ways to the point where they're committed to selling. He's a $5 million cap hit.
That's not bad.
And he has, not an insane scoring touch, but he's a guy that you can get without having to give up the house for it.
Well, it gives you depth down the middle too. Like
He's last year slashed 11, 32, 43. He can at least create some scoring.
Like he could be Riley Nash,
And that's what it is too, is that there's just the depth that they had last year just doesn't exist now. While they still were heavily reliant on the first line, make no mistake, you could at least count on somebody from the second or third line to step up. The fourth line was good. It is what it is for what they were designed to do. But on a given night, you could have some peace of mind in the fact that, okay, somebody other than Bergeron, Marchand, and Pasternak's going to step up. And right now they just don't have that, so you have to make a move for a guy that can provide you that.
Definitely. And we'll have to keep an eye on it. Once they do, we'll probably be back here discussing it. I have nothing else to add.
Interesting weekend coming up.
Definitely, yeah, that's true. We mentioned that as well. Toronto in here on Saturday night. Vancouver on Thursday. By the time this gets up, that Sunday night, the Vegas thing, as you pointed out, it looked like a better weekend. Cutting down the Leafs is just whether they can score.
Right, and to sort of see where this team is at is, can they at least compete with the Leafs? Even if they lose, did they not get their doors blown off? I mean, the best team that they played was right out of the chute was the Capitals, and
that's a good point.
So your sort of measuring stick against team and Cup champion is that brought pretty much everybody back. Is you got playoffs last year? It's presumed to be the top or second best team in your division, and just could you hold
like I said, they've got the threads kind of where you get on the road, so maybe they make a decision.
Well, and that's here in Boston, because it can be Dallas, Arizona, and every year rises up all this doubt. And if they can during these 4 games, it'll at least be worth something boost, I guess, if nothing else.
Maybe. The schedule has not been kind for the season. I mean, they had the Western Canada trip already. They've been home, nice homestand, but then they go right back out on the road later in the season. But it certainly hasn't helped the team.
And this is how the lens of following the Bruins.
Definitely. When I actually saw him in a picture,
the collar is cool. Title years, but
I agree.
That's about.
Okay, well, that's good enough, I guess. Blackhawks come out Thursday afternoon. I was like, saw them already. Whatever. It is what it is. I think that's it. We'll get out of here. We will try to stay out of the Uber. Follow us
about our bosses.
Yeah, exactly. If we are gonna say something, probably do it to their faces anyway.
Yeah, so. Sounds good.
Don't
always assume you're being
an Uber. You never know who's listening. So that's I'm Mike Cole. That's Logan. I would like a mulligan on pronouncing Logan. This has been the NESN Bruins podcast. We will be back. We're still kind of working at the scheduling.
Sooner than
we'll be back before then. We will catch you then. Thanks for joining us this week, and adios.